Welcome to the Bare Marriage Podcast. I'm Sheila Ray Gregoire from baremarriage.com, where we like to talk about healthy, evidence-based biblical advice for your sex life and your marriage. And this is a really exciting time for us because our new marriage book, The Marriage You Want, launches on March 11th. And we're just having so much fun looking through the data. We're starting our launch team on Monday, next Monday, January 27th, but you can get an invite to it right now if you send in your pre-order receipt for The Marriage You Want. Just send it to pre-order at marriageyouwantbook.com. The link is also in the podcast notes. But this book has been a long time coming, and it's been so much on our hearts because we've written about sex like ad infinitum. We've said so much about what the Evangelical church teaches about sex. But what if we could do something healthy from the ground up? What if we could fix what they say about marriage? What if we could make it healthy? And what if we could stop couples from getting into the problems that so many have experienced because of toxic teachings in other books? What if we could get back to what Jesus wanted? And that's what we're trying to do in The Marriage You Want. And so today, Keith and I, to set up, we're starting going through the book next week. But before we do, there's one other thing that we really want to talk about. And that's, why is it that so many evangelical books do cause harm? What's the commonality? And so I'm going to bring my husband Keith on to talk about that right now. All right, babe. Back around 20 years ago,
yes,
you and I started speaking at Family Life Canada marriage conferences. Do you remember that?
Yep.
Yeah,
it was a long time ago.
We were in our mid-30s. Yep. We were young, but they wanted younger couples. They wanted a physician, and it worked out well. But at the time, they don't anymore, but at the time, they were using the old American curriculum for those conferences. And there were a whole bunch of talks. It was like 13 talks.
Oh, yeah, it was a heavy weekend. It was very content filled.
Yes. And the Saturday morning had 3 different talks. And the takeaway from all 3 is you just need to commit more, right? Like marriages will do better if you just commit more.
Yeah. All the standard cliches, nail the back door shut.
Yeah. Never say the D word.
The jokes about Billy Graham's wife, Ruth, saying she'd never considered divorce, but maybe murder once or twice.
Right. Yes.
All that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Right?
So that was.
Don't ever divorce no matter what.
Yeah. And it always just felt so weird when we were preparing those talks because it just didn't seem to apply to us because we weren't together because we were committed. We were together because, we wanted to be, because we had grown together. We'd built a life together. We had kids, like all of these other things. And commitment wasn't the main thing. Yeah.
It was also kind of a downer saying that, just it's a horrible, hard slog, but just don't give yourself any other option and somehow it'll all get better.
Yeah, it was weird. And it reminds me, I had Natalie Hoffman on the podcast a while ago talking about how when she was in the worst place with her marriage, her abusive marriage before she got divorced, she would read all these Christian marriage books that would try to convince her to stay. Yeah. And I remember saying to her, it's almost like they were trying to convince you to stay in a marriage you hate rather than create a marriage you love.
Yeah.
And that's kind of become the tagline for our new book,
Yes.
The Marriage You Want. We said it twice in the book, in the introduction and the conclusion is, we're not trying to convince you to stay in a marriage you hate. We want to help you create a marriage you love.
That's right.
But that seemed to be what everyone was always saying. You need to commit, you need to commit, you need to commit. Yep. And as I started doing this work into research and into looking at peer-reviewed studies and reading some of the secular marriage books, we read John Gottman's 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work as the control book when we did Great Sex Rescue. I noticed something weird about all these secular marriage books is that they don't talk about the importance of commitment.
Yeah, it's not one chapter, much less 1/4 of the book, which is what a lot of Christian books seem like.
Yeah, it's not about how you need to commit, because what they're doing instead is they're helping you create a marriage that you want to be in. They're helping you build the skills and understand what goes into a great marriage. And commitment really isn't the point. Because commitment really just wasn't the big point. And when researchers have looked at why people stay together or what makes great marriages, it's not about commitment. Commitment might be why people stay together, especially in the Christian church, but it isn't why they have good marriages.
Yes, absolutely. And if a lack of taking marriage seriously, which is what they sort of imply, they imply that people these days just get divorced on the drop of a hat.
Right.
That's kind of the mentality, right? And we Christians are committed. Even if there was a problem with that, which I don't think it's true. I don't think most people go into marriage going, meh, well, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Like, I think that is such a straw man. I don't think people actually do that. But even if that was a problem, okay, then address that you need to be serious about your commitment. But that shouldn't be like the main point.
I know.
Right? Like the main point is, well, you're stuck now.
Yeah.
Like there should be something else to say about how to make it actually work well.
Yeah. And as I was thinking about that, and as we were writing The Marriage You Want, I started looking at some of a lot of the other books that we've critiqued and what is it that they have in common? Because people often say to me, like, Sheila, do you just hate every book? And I've been accused of that. I've been accused, especially by some of the bigger authors, saying you're just trying to get famous and you're just trying to get people to buy your book by saying that every single other book is terrible, because there's no way that every single other book could be terrible. And so they'll say like, well, which books do you actually like?
Unless all the books are all saying the same thing.
And that's exactly it. And that's what we want to talk about today is what if...
Yeah.
In evangelical marriage advice, they're all based on the same faulty premise, which then leads to a bunch of unhealthy or slanted advice, which doesn't help.
Right.
And as I've been looking at all of these books, I have found that the books that are unhealthy, which is the majority, are all based on a faulty premise and then 4 subsequent suppositions that flow from that premise. Is that the way you say it in logic? That there's a premise and then the suppositions flow? Yeah. We're hoping. If it's not, leave a comment. But I think that's what it was.
But yeah, there's one premise that then results in other teachings. So we get to you can't divorce no matter what as our main teaching for a reason.
Right.
And it's because of where we started.
Right.
And we start by making marriage harder than it needs to be. Then the only logical place we can end up is telling people, well, you can't leave.
Yep.
The alternative is to go back and question that initial premise and say, is this really true? Can we do marriage differently than that? And then maybe we don't have to tell people you need to stay in a marriage you hate because we can actually make a marriage you love.
Exactly. And wouldn't that be better? Like, wow. Okay. So let's talk about that faulty premise that almost everything is built on. And it's one that we've talked about so much here on the Bare Marriage Podcast. And it goes like this. Men are in authority over women. And so he's in charge of the marriage. She submits and, he's an authority over her.
There is no other way to do marriage biblically than that.
And so that is the premise that most evangelical marriage books start from. When you believe that, you need a reason for believing that. Okay, so the first supposition flows from that premise. Because if men are in authority over women, there has to be a reason. And that reason is that men and women are totally different species. Totally different creatures.
And we see that in every Christian marriage book. Absolutely, it's there.
So here you have a marriage where he's an authority. It's not working. They're not teammates. So how do you get people to stay together? Well, you tell them your expectations are the problem. You are expecting too much. And that may keep people going for a bit. But when the marriage still looks like it's going to blow up, they come up with this gem. Marriage is hard. Don't you know marriage is hard? And again, that may keep people chugging along for a while. Well, what do I expect? It's supposed to be hard. And when that still doesn't work, then they come in with number 5, the big guns. You're not allowed to divorce. And so that is the progression, right? He's an authority. The genders are completely different species. Your expectations are the problem. Marriage is hard. You can't divorce.
And you see all 5 of those themes in pretty much every Christian marriage book.
Yeah.
And the reason you see this escalation of drop your expectations, you should expect it to be hard, and you can't leave no matter what, is because of those faulty premises we made at the beginning, which is that men are supposed to be in charge and you are completely different species who can't possibly understand each other.
Right.
So if you start a marriage with those 2 things, how do you expect it to be successful?
Yeah.
Right? It just can't work.
And you can't. And that's why you need to tell people all these other things.
But instead of rejecting those premises and saying, well, maybe that's not the way we should do marriage, you can't do that because people are being taught again and again and again that's the only biblical way to do things, which is nonsense. But they're taught that. So therefore it naturally progresses that, well, then we have to explain it. Well, it's just meant to be hard.
Yeah.
well, it doesn't matter. You can't get out. Like
Right.
that's the kind of way we have to go, because we're not willing to challenge those initial premises.
Suppositions.
Yeah,
We're not
whatever.
sure. Leave
You know
a
what I
comment
mean.
if you know. But yes. Okay. So what I would like to do is to take each of those 5 things in turn and look at them in more detail and just give you all examples of it. We've talked a lot about each of these on our podcast in different ways, but let's put them all in one and show you what we mean that this is throughout evangelicalism. Okay. So let's start with the first one. Men must be in authority over women.
Yeah.
And we have talked about this so much. We've done clips with John Piper. We did a great podcast on the Danvers series, which defends, the men being in authority over women and women being the ones who must submit no matter what. We've done so much of this. So I don't want to belabor that too much, but I do want to just for fun, let's give you a different example that we haven't used before on this podcast. So do you want to explain it?
So, the resolution is a book. There's a resolution for men and a resolution for women, and it followed after those movies,
the Kendrick brothers,
Courageous.
Yeah,
or
the
whatever
Courageous movie.
Yeah. And the concept is you resolve to live marriage God's way. And so at the beginning of each of those books, there's a resolution. I solemnly resolve to, and the men's one is one way and the women's one is another way. Yeah. And I think it's incredibly telling how those two are different.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't want tell me if I'm getting into the weeds a little bit here.
Okay.
But I don't think we should be dividing up Christian virtue into men and women.
Yeah.
Right? Like the Bible doesn't say men have these fruits of the Spirit and women have these fruits of the Spirit.
No.
Like as soon as we start dividing things up, that this is the virtue that men are supposed to have and these are the virtues that women are supposed to have.
Yeah.
I think you're on shaky ground. But this book does that in spades, right? Because it's all the standard complementarian stuff, which is basically that men are meant to lead and take control and be courageous, and women are supposed to submit and be malleable and do what they're told and stay quiet. One of the resolutions is for the wife to live a life of contentment. To be content with my current state of life. Like that's one of her resolutions. His resolutions are to confront evil and to courageously defend my family and that sort of stuff. What I find particularly interesting is when the resolutions for the men and the women are almost the same, but not quite. Like one of them was the men, I will confront evil, pursue justice, and love mercy.
Okay.
So the wives is, I will pursue justice, love mercy, and show compassion toward others.
Yeah.
So women are not to confront evil. Don't confront evil women. That's a man's job.
Yeah, you need to show compassion. Yes.
And it's just crazy because this whole idea, and it's all because men are supposed to be in charge. Therefore, any virtue or good thing or fruit of the Spirit, which is sort of like active, attacking the enemy, showing strength, those are men virtues. And anything that's compassionate or caring or nurturing, those are women values. And it's just terrible. That's not what it should be. But all these books are based on that, and it flows naturally from the idea that men are in charge, women submit. So therefore, we have completely different roles.
Yeah, and what we see too that you just mentioned is so guys are allowed to confront evil, but women have to show compassion. And in a marriage, what that means is he can point out her faults, but she can't point out his. And that's what we hear over and over again in these books, right? Emerson Eggerichs saying that it is disrespectful if a wife asks him to stop leaving wet towels on the bed. And we've dealt with this over and over again in the Bare Marriage podcast. Well, I don't want to do that here, but trust me on this when we say that almost every evangelical marriage book that we've read in some way tells women or discourages women from confronting their husband when their husband's doing something wrong.
Yes. I mean, from Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, John Piper said that a woman's influence on a man can either be direct or personal.
Right.
So the more personal the relationship is, the less direct she's allowed to be.
Right.
Right? So like if you're a woman who's created a stoplight, well, the men don't know you, so they're allowed to listen to you and stop at your stoplight.
Right. but he actually uses that example.
He uses that exact
example
analogy
of an engineer who does traffic and stuff. She's allowed to do that. Yeah.
But the logical extension on the opposite is that in the most personal of your relationships with your husband, you must be the least direct.
Yes.
In order to be a truly biblical woman.
Yeah.
That's garbage.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. And what kind of man wants a woman to be so incredibly indirect and never really telling him what she thinks? Like, what kind of a Christian man wants that? That's crazy.
Yeah. And in The Marriage You Want, we show you what happens when people act that way.
Yeah.
And we show you over and over again, every single chart. And there are so many charts in The Marriage You Want, but every single one shows that teamwork is what brings you a good marriage.
Yes.
Teamwork helps you feel like, my spouse knows how to make me laugh. We have shared hobbies. Like, all these happy things flow from teamwork. But as soon as you say he is in authority over her, or that her opinions aren't as important as his, and that he gets the final say, all of those benefits
And those are the same thing.
go away. Yeah.
If you say he has the final say, you are saying his opinions are more important than hers. You may not think that's what you're saying, but that is what you're saying logically.
Okay, so let's go on to the next point.
Okay.
So here we have a marriage.
Men and women are completely different creatures.
Men and women are completely different creatures, and we see this everywhere. Shanti Feldon, we talked about on the podcast last week, where we showed how the whole idea that men need respect and women need love, that popularized. James Dobson started it, and then Emerson Eggerichs wrote Love and Respect. Shanti Feldon wrote For Women Only. In Love and Respect, Eggerichs said that he got his information from For Women Only, the survey that she did, which was faulty, and we proved it, and I'm so excited about that.
Yep.
But the funny thing was, she asked men this terribly horrible question.
Leading question, double-barreled.
Yep, leading double-barreled question. Would you rather be alone and unloved or inadequate and disrespected? And because the men chose alone and unloved, she said that what men don't like is being disrespected. Even though, as we talked about last week, disrespect and inadequate are not synonyms.
Yeah.
And it's actually women who react more to disrespect than men. Men react more to being inadequate.
Yeah.
But regardless, she asked men this, said that men don't want to be disrespected. And then Emerson Eggerichs said, so therefore women value love.
Yes.
Like, they never asked women. They just assumed that women are different from men.
A equals B and B equals C. Therefore, G is a really nice letter.
Yeah.
It's like a total non sequitur.
Yeah, it totally is. And so many of our books, though, are based on this idea that men are like this, women are like this. So men are visual, women aren't.
Yeah.
Men have sex drives and men want sex, women don't.
Yeah.
Women want to talk, men want to have sex.
Yeah.
Men don't care about emotional connection, women do. Men are logical, women are feelers. Like, this is all throughout our Christian literature. And none of it is based on science.
No, it's not.
None of it. And
but people love it because it does two things. First of all, it confirms their belief that men are supposed to be over women. Because if women and men are completely different, then it's justifiable. Because this whole idea that men and women are equal, but they show their equality by the wife putting herself under the husband,
yes,
is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And everyone knows that's ridiculous, but there's no way to justify that.
Yeah.
So, but then if you can somehow create this idea that women and men are such totally different creatures that they can still be equal, but they're so different that their equality looks like this.
Yeah.
That's the only way it can be plausible. So it feeds that, and that's why people like it. The second thing is it just feeds into the whole gimmickiness, which you talked about last week.
Yeah, it's totally gimmicky.
It's, and like even secular books too, Mars and Venus.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not just the Christian world.
Yeah.
But this whole idea of trying to say men and women are totally different, it's a gimmicky thing because then it's like, well, you'll understand the secret to understanding men or women, and therefore all your problems will be solved.
Yeah.
As opposed to just the fact that human beings are human beings.
Yeah. And in the Christian world, we have all of these books that are like, men are like this, women are like this. So let me take His Needs, Her Needs as an example.
Oh, yeah, it's a great one.
Okay. So His Needs, Her Needs lists the 5 main needs of men and the 5 main needs of women.
Yep.
Okay?
And it says that you are affair proofing your marriage.
Yes.
Right? So if you meet these 5 needs of your husband, or if you meet these 5 needs of your wife, you will have an affair proof marriage. That's what it promises. Again, another gimmick.
And
right?
likewise, if you don't, then you
Your
shouldn't
own
be
fault.
surprised if they have an affair. Okay. So here are her needs. She needs affection, intimate conversation, honesty and openness, financial commitment, and family commitment. All right.
Okay.
Okay. So at least she needs intimacy in some way, and she needs open communication.
Sure.
Here's what he needs. He needs sexual fulfillment, recreation, so to have fun, having a physically attractive wife, domestic support, and admiration.
Yes. These are all needs.
Needs. So he needs someone to do his dishes and laundry.
Yeah, exactly. and provide sex on demand.
Right.
But he doesn't need affection or communication,
Yes.
or those things. I mean, what a terrible view of men. What a terrible view of men.
No, it's totally a low view of men. It's completely a low view of men. And it reminds me of Jimmy Evans' book, Marriage on the Rock, which we looked at right before Christmas.
Yep.
We did our one sheet on it. And we talked about this quote. And I just want to read it again because it's so perfect. So here is Jimmy Evans, formerly of XO Marriage. He just stepped down at the beginning of January. Our podcast about Jimmy Evans came out right in the middle of the scandal with Daystar, where the recording dropped of him being completely spiritually abusive, but with Jonathan Lamb, and he has since stepped down. So I don't know what'll happen to XO Marriage, but that's good news. That's like a marriage organization that was doing harm. He's now stepped down. So yay. Okay, but here's what he said. Here's what he says the difference between men and women are. For a man, the ideal woman is someone who makes him feel like a king. He wants a cheerleader to tell him how great he is and to encourage him throughout his life. The ideal woman aggressively meets his sexual needs, looks her best at all times, and provides a home environment to which he can look forward all day.
Okay.
So he needs what, like a hooker,
Yeah, it's trophy. I mean, she needs to be his trophy. He's the deal, and she's the crown on his head, basically.
Right. Now, here's what a woman needs. The ideal man is sensitive and affectionate. She wants a man who lovingly initiates the well-being of the home while treating her as an equal in decision-making. She wants a man who opens up to her and communicates with her in an intimate and honest manner. So very similar to Willard Harley here.
Yeah.
But what you'll notice is like the things that she needs on the whole lead to an intimate relationship.
Yeah.
The things that he needs do not.
Yeah.
They just get him what he likes without him having to actually work on anything or feel connected. Yeah. And that's exactly what Willard Harley does too. So, and over again, when we say that they say that men are like this, women are like this, what they say is that men do not have a need for intimacy.
Yeah. Or open communication.
Or the things that actually grow connection.
Or that men don't benefit from being challenged. I mean, like I think in a healthy marriage, having your wife like let you know when you're getting off base is such a powerfully good thing, right? Yeah. Like we keep each other in check. We balance each other out, and that's a good thing. And I want that. All this teaching that, women are not supposed to confront their men. Like, how is that helpful to anybody?
Because he needs to know you respect him. He needs to know you admire him. So don't tell him anything. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy. Okay. So here we have this terrible relationship where we're justifying men being an authority and saying that men don't actually need connection and creating all these gender stereotypes that don't work, especially about sex.
Because all those needs for women are just healthy needs of humans.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, they really are.
And all the needs of men are kind of just perks.
Yeah, they're perks. Yes. And we do talk about that in the Marriage You Want as well, as we say, let's deal with the foundational stuff of what actually does build connection before we look at all these other things. This is crazy stuff. But when all of this isn't working, because it doesn't, it does not work when you do marriage this way.
Yeah.
Then the answer has to be your expectations are the problem. Okay, so we've got another book that's based on a Kendrick movie. All right, so The Resolution for Men and Women was based on Courageous. This one's based on The Love Dare, is based on the movie Foolproof. Okay, and The Love Dare has been a massive bestseller. My overwhelming feeling reading it is just that it's super boring. Like it doesn't say anything new, but it does sell super well. And it has, all the same toxic messages, but it's kind of more fluff. But I want to read you this one part in it. Okay. This is from day 21. God alone can satisfy even when all else fails you. Your husband may be late coming home again, but God will always be right on time. Your wife may let you down again, but God can always be trusted to deliver on his promises. Every day you place expectations on your spouse. Sometimes they meet them, sometimes they don't, but never will they be able to totally satisfy all the demands you ask of them, partly because some of your demands are unreasonable and partly because your mate is human. God, however, is not, and those who approach him in utter dependence each day for the real needs in their life are the ones who find out just how dependable he is.
And which it just sounds so spiritual.
It does.
And so virtuous.
It does. Yes.
Right? But what they're basically saying is, if you have problems, just ignore them.
Yeah.
They'll get better. God will make it all right in the end.
Yeah.
You know, it's crazy.
And if you have problems, it's because you were expecting something instead of realizing you can only get these things met from God. Which I think is a weird thing to say because if all of our needs could ultimately be met in God and we can't expect our spouse to do anything, we need to go to God for our fulfillment. Why are we getting married in the first place? Right? Like there is a reason that we get married. And that's for oneness and connection. And if we're not going to be able to achieve that oneness and connection, and if we're going to have to get every single need met by God anyway, then why are we getting married?
Yeah.
Like, it's just...
Well, because I need someone to clean my house.
Yeah, I guess so. And to be a trophy wife.
According to Jimmy Evans, anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so let's listen to Vadi Bakum. Here's a clip from Vadi Bakum talking about this.
Anyone who's looking to marriage for their fulfillment is, number one, guilty of idolatry, because your fulfillment is found only in God. Amen? If you're looking to anything other than God for your fulfillment, you're guilty of idolatry. And secondly, you're going to be disappointed. Amen? You were never, ever intended to find your fulfillment in your marriage. You were never intended to find your fulfillment in your children. You were designed and created to be fulfilled by God in Christ.
Okay, so again, very typical.
Yep.
Your fulfillment is in God alone.
Yep. Yeah, so God's apparently going to magically clean my house for me because I have a need for domestic support. If my wife's not doing it, I got to go to God.
Yeah.
I don't know how that works. I just don't understand how this fits together. Please explain it to me.
But again, the idea is if you are sad, it's because you expected something of your spouse. And that is wrong because you're supposed to get all your fulfillment from God.
Yes.
So what this is really telling people is every time you're sad in your marriage, it's because you're not trusting God.
Yeah.
You know, that's the underlying message. Okay, here's something from Gary Thomas in A Lifelong Love. All right. And he's saying this in the context of how your heavenly father is your father-in-law. So God is actually your spouse's father. And think about how that will impact how you see God. Because if you picture God as your spouse's father, then you have a lot more compassion for your spouse. So here's what he says. Women, if you dreamed of long, soul-filled discussions late into the night, but 6 months after the wedding realized you married a man who wouldn't know an emotion if it bit him on the nose until he bled, try dealing with your frustration by understanding that you made a good God very happy by agreeing to love his son with all his limitations. Your disappointment,
and then you send her to therapy, right?
Yeah, your disappointment at perhaps not having the marriage you imagined is understandable, but worshiping God by loving your husband anyway is a precious choice that will be richly rewarded in eternity and will greatly impact your life on earth as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so again...
So this guy needs help, though. This guy, if he doesn't recognize an emotion if it bit him on the nose,
yeah,
he needs to go to therapy. He needs to figure that out. And there's no message to actually help him grow. It's just,
right.
Don't expect him to be different.
Yeah. Yeah, and in chapter 8 of our book, by the way, we do talk about what to do when... people don't know how to recognize their emotions. It's actually a really good chapter with a lot of very, very practical exercises because it's a huge issue.
And it's a real problem for a lot of men because they grew up in these cultures that taught that men are not supposed to feel feelings or recognize them or admit them. And that's hard. And you've got some catching up to do.
Right.
And we talk through how you can do that.
Right. Okay. Here's another clip.
Okay.
This time it's by Francis and Lisa Chan. And they're talking about their book, I think You and Me Forever, I believe is the book. This is from the study. And here's Lisa talking about our expectations about fairness.
You know, with your marriage, do this in the, for the glory of God, because you were created by him and for him. And so how I love Lisa, it should be a picture to the world of how Christ loves the church.
Right. If you really think about the example of Christ, that's the thing, is we're so not willing to suffer at all, myself included. It's like that's a hard thing to desire, is to have to put up with a little suffering or a little, maybe all my needs aren't going to feel like they're being met. But I am honoring Christ, and I am going to be the one even that displays the gospel, even if he's not going to right now. And we're so about fairness and equality, and well, if I'm going to show this, then he's got to show it. But no, it's just you and God. Are you displaying the gospel personally? And that's a lot harder. It's like, okay, yeah, let's do it together. Because then but what about when one person's not doing it? And then you have to push through and say, no, I will honor Christ at any cost. That's hard.
Okay, 2 things. She's saying we aren't supposed to expect fairness. Right?
Yeah.
And that fairness is just, it's just a wrong expectation in our marriage. We actually measured this. We have, in 4 different places in the marriage you want, we have what we call the unfairness threshold, because we noticed this in the data. which is that people can put up with unfairness in different areas for a certain amount of time, but then everything just snaps. And it's often around the 15 to 20 year mark. And then everything just snaps. And funnily enough, often at 25 years, things are a little bit better, but we think that's because so many people divorce at the 20, at the year 20. So the people who are still married at 25
are either the ones who have worked it out and they're more fair now, or they've just given up.
Yeah, exactly. But it's when we say you just need to put up with unfairness, it doesn't work long term.
Yeah. Well, and how is that biblical?
Like we looked at things like women never having an orgasm.
Yeah.
We looked at unfairness in housework. We looked at unfairness in who does the repair when you have conflict in your marriage, unfairness in all these different things. And it's like over time, this has a worse and worse and worse effect on your marriage.
And by telling people you shouldn't expect things to be fair, you don't make anything better.
Yeah.
You just stretch out the amount of time they're willing to tolerate it before they finally snap.
Right.
But how is this biblical? Like that you should expect things to be unfair.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point of all through the Bible, it's, oh Lord, like how long? Like seeking for justice is a Christian virtue.
Yeah.
So if we're in a relationship where there is inequity, like things are not fair, things are not just, we need to address that.
Yeah.
Like how is that? Like that is biblical. Saying, well, you know what? It's just life isn't fair. Suck it up. That's not right.
And the thing is, all of this sounds so spiritual. It really does. And you can tell that Lisa loves Jesus. And I'm not trying to say she doesn't. Like, you can tell she does. It all sounds so spiritual. But it flows from this faulty premise and everything flows from there. And what it doesn't give is any tools on how to make it better.
Right.
Because the entire message that we keep getting is gaslight yourself into thinking you are the problem because you're not being Christ-like, instead of, oh, there's a problem in your marriage. Okay, well, what can we do about that? Because we don't want you to live miserable lives.
Yeah, because there are expectations that are unrealistic.
Yeah.
Right? And there's expectations that are completely realistic. And you should be able to discuss that. And if I'm frustrated because you're not meeting my expectations, either you need to step up to the plate, or I need to realize my expectation is unrealistic.
Yeah.
But if we don't ever talk about that,
Yeah.
if I just listen to all these teachers and I go, well, I guess I should just shut my mouth and not have that expectation anymore. The best case scenario is we don't fight today.
Right.
Like
But
that's not going to
everything
build
builds up.
intimacy.
Yeah.
It's not going to build intimacy. It's not going to build connection. It's not going to make our marriage stronger. It's not going to make us happier. It's not going to do any good thing. Right? It's just going to paper over differences until finally you can't handle it anymore.
Yeah.
Which is what we see in our data.
And Gary Thomas' thing about how he doesn't know an emotion, you're allowed to expect that you'll be able to connect emotionally with your spouse. Like that is the point of marriage today.
Yeah. And if your spouse can't meet your expectations today for whatever reason, you're allowed to expect that they're going to try and grow in that area.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you have to have grace with each other for sure. But at the same time, you like there are expectations that are reasonable in a marriage. And
interesting, I said that of these 5 points, the secular marriage books really don't talk about them much. This is the one that they do.
But they address it in a very different way.
But they address it in a very different way. Yes. Let's figure out what are how we express our expectations, what we do about them when we feel like our expectations aren't being met, how we can handle that constructively, how to figure out if you're being realistic or not. That's the way they handle it, not just don't have any and suck it up. I also found it interesting that Lisa was saying we should just get used to suffering.
Yes.
That suffering in marriage is I find that so strange. Why not instead say, let's get used to working and building skill sets and building muscles? Like if something isn't working in your marriage, then let's figure out, instead of saying, let's just suffer it through, let's say, let's work at it and let's learn how to do things better. So instead of suffering, let's work. Just two different sides, but instead we get the suffering thing, like Martha Peace and The Excellent Wife. And we did a big podcast on her as well. We did 2 actually on The Excellent Wife. And we have a download for that as well. I'll put a link in the podcast notes. Terribly horrible book. But she says, for instance, to a woman who's married to a cruel husband, and cruel was her
She used the
word.
word cruel,
She did. That it is a privilege to suffer for righteousness' sake.
Yeah.
So we hear this again and again.
So
You're supposed to
staying
suffer.
married to an abusive man is a righteous act.
Right.
In this world.
Right. Yeah.
That's appalling.
Yeah. Because it's a sin to expect him not to be cruel. It's a sin to expect him to be any other way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
And that brings me to one of my least favorite passages in any book we've ever read, which is
Right.
from Every Heart Restored.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Part of the Every Man's Battle series. It's written by Fred Stoker and his wife Brenda. But Steve Arterburn was part of it too, the author of Every Man's Battle. And he tells this really long story of a woman who realized her husband treated her horribly and ignored her unless she gave him sex. So she just gave him sex every day.
To manage his emotions.
And she said, I felt like a human toilet for semen. It was terrible. And if this is what men are like when they want sex, when we're not connecting at all, and they just want brutal, one-sided sex, then what is wrong with men? Yeah.
And his response was not, you're right. Men shouldn't be like that. The reason is the societal factors that have created men to be like that. No, he didn't do that. What did he say?
He said, men just don't have that Christian view of sex.
Yeah. Like that's just the way God made men.
Yeah. And if
like
once
that.
you understand that, then you won't feel like the human toilet for semen so much.
But how's that going to make you not feel that way? Because basically you're feeling horrible, and he's just saying, yeah, that's the way God made men to be. Like, this is a horrible view of men. I don't know why men put up with this. I just don't get it.
Yeah. No, it's awful.
You should have no expectation for your husband to treat you like a human being.
Right.
That's really what Christian marriage teaching is?
Yep.
Come on. That's crazy.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So here we are. We've told people, hey, your expectations are wrong. Don't expect anything. And women have tried that. And men have tried that. Everyone has tried that. We've all tried to gaslight ourselves, saying the problem is me. I'm not going to God with my fulfillment. I need to read scripture more. I need to change my own character. I need to change my own heart. And we try that for a couple of years, and it doesn't work. So now what we hear is marriage is hard.
Yep.
And
Well, yeah, because you're suffering. You're trying to do it their way, and it's not working out. And you're just saying, this can't be right because it's too hard.
Yes.
And the answer is, no, it's supposed to be
It's
hard.
supposed to be hard. It is supposed to be hard. And we hear this everywhere. Think about Gary Thomas's book, Sacred Marriage, with the subtitle, right? What if God created marriage to make you wholly not happy?
Yeah.
You know? And that whole idea. So let's listen to a couple of clips. First, I've got Jimmy Evans from Exo Marriage talking about this. What he's talking about, the woman with the 5, how she's been disappointed 5 times. He's referring to the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4.
But he's using her as an example of women in general.
Yeah.
She thought 5 men had let her down. And again, they were probably knuckleheads at times, and they did things wrong. But she was wrong. The truth was, she expected something of a man he couldn't give. And when he didn't, she rejected him. Now, I've made this mistake, so I'm not pointing the fingers. I've made this mistake multiple times. Listen to what I'm about to say. Because there have been times in your life when you did not know Jesus or you weren't walking with Jesus, there have been times that you transferred the expectations of your life to people and you set them up for failure because they couldn't be Jesus to you.
Okay, I hate that. I mean, first, how...
Holy eisegesis, Batman!
I know, how do people get away with saying that about scripture? There's absolutely no evidence that she expected too much from her husband. And there's actually a lot of evidence that she was probably abused and neglected.
Well, in this time period, men were allowed to divorce their wives and women weren't allowed to divorce their husbands. So, come on. Who is the person at fault here?
I know, it's crazy. Okay, now here's the late Tim Keller talking about how marriage is hard, and he throws in gender differences just for fun too.
Like a lot of you read the book. The reality is that marriage is difficult. It is hard. No 2 people are ultimately compatible because all human beings are sinners, including Christians, which means they're self-centered. That means when you bring any 2 self-centered people, still deeply self-centered, even after they've believed the gospel together, it's going to be very, very difficult. Plus, you've got the fact that men and women are different, and that's part of the point of marriage, is to bring people together who are somewhat mysterious to each other. You really don't understand why they think that way. And when you put the gender difference and you put the self-centeredness and you put all the other natural things together, marriage is actually pretty hard to get to learn how to fit.
Yeah, and okay, again, just isolated, hearing this, marriage is hard. I wouldn't say marriage is hard. I'd say marriage takes work, but it doesn't sound toxic in and of itself. But when you throw that into an environment where you've got all these gender differences and hierarchy and people gaslighting their own feelings and being afraid to confront and all that stuff, this just continues to perpetuate unhealthy relationships and discourages people from realizing that this is a warning light. Like, this is hard. This should be telling me something's wrong. Like, there's something we need to work on as a couple.
Yeah.
That light gets shut off because, nope, marriage is hard.
And that's actually a huge thing that bothers me about this message, is because if we assume marriage is hard, then when marriage is hard, we won't try to change it. We'll just think this is my lot to live with. But even worse than that, when you're engaged or dating and the relationship is hard, that won't be a red flag for you that maybe this isn't the person for me. That will just be, well, yeah, but relationships are hard.
Yeah, well, marriage could be hard because right now we're financially strapped. I'm working 2 jobs. We've got a newborn and twin toddlers. And like, for whatever reason, like, marriage could be hard right now because of those things. That's a different kind of hard than I'm coming home drunk every night.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But there's no distinction in these teachings.
Right, because the way I would say it, and the way we do say it in our book, is that life is hard.
Yeah.
Right? Life brings financial difficulties. Life brings illnesses. When you get married, life is more complicated because you have kids, or you have infertility, or you have 2 sets of parents who could need help. Like, life is hard. But marriage should actually make it easier.
Yeah. 2 are better than 1. That's the whole point, right?
But instead, the message is, no, marriage is the thing that is hard.
Yeah.
And that's a really destructive message, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the love dare. You ready for this one?
Do they think marriage is hard?
Yeah, they do. Imagine that. But what I love is this bit. They say this on day 19. Like it or not, agape love isn't something you can do. It's something only God can do. But because of his great love for you and his love for your spouse, he chooses to express his love through you. And you cannot manufacture unconditional love out of your own heart. It's impossible. It's beyond your capabilities. And so they're saying, like, actually loving someone, and it's in the chapter called Love is Impossible.
Right.
So actually loving someone well is impossible, and you need God to do it for you, because all of this is an impossible slog. And I find that so strange, because has anyone met any non-Christians?
Yeah. How deep is the bubble for them? Because I've got so many friends of different faiths or of no faith at all who have marriages that are decades long and who are quite happy with each other.
Yeah.
But apparently that's impossible.
Yeah.
Like, the evidence of your own eyes, like, how could you write that and not stop and go, wait a minute, that can't be right?
Yeah, it's kind of weird, right? Yeah. Like, we are all made in the image of God, and God is love.
Yeah.
And so we are all actually able to love.
Yeah.
Yes, sin mars us. Yes, but we are still made in the image of God. Yeah. And lots of non-Christians have good marriages. So this whole idea that you can't have a good marriage without God is wrong. God should make it easier for sure, and God should transform us for sure. But it's not like love is impossible and marriage is impossible. It's just weird.
Yeah, but I think that's because that's part of the gaslighting too, right? Because it's because of our love for God is impossible, so we need God in order to love our spouse, right? Like all these Instagram reels that are like, I could not get through another day with my wife except for God's love, being renewed every morning. It's like, and they think this is a flex, right?
Yeah.
But it's like this whole idea, because this mentality that because the love of God is in my heart, I can love my unlovable wife. I can, respect my unrespectable husband.
Yeah.
This whole mindset that's there, it's another way of saying that I'm so close to God because I'm able to love you despite you. Yeah. How is that a healthy view of anything?
Yeah.
Even Jimmy Evans too, he was basically saying, if you're not following Jesus, you won't be able to do things. Right. So then whenever you are having a problem in your marriage, it's your faith that's the problem, not the issue in the marriage.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah. It
really doesn't make any sense.
Okay. I want to listen to a harder clip to listen to now. That is really typical of what we will hear on marriage conferences, in sermons. It's really emotional. And I really do feel for Lisa Chan here. But the message that she's giving is that we shouldn't have boundaries.
So it's still about marriage being hard, but the solution to marriage being hard is not having boundaries?
Right. So let's just listen in.
Al says...
even just the whole idea of we have to set up boundaries for our humility. And I'm thinking, I don't see that in Scripture, you know? And I think about just this one story as you were talking. I was thinking about my grandma, who has since gone to be with the Lord. But, you know, she was married to an alcoholic, my grandfather, who died when I was a baby. But early on, she was telling me how it was his birthday one year and he had been out. She had baked him this beautiful cake. She wanted to show him that she loved him. And she said, so he was just gone. And I thought, you know, I wasn't going to be able to give it to him. Well, he finally comes in late at night and he's sitting on the couch. So she says, I went into the kitchen and I got the cake and I brought it out to him. And she said, just the look on his face, the humility that she had to show love and grace to him when he didn't deserve it. And I said, Grandma, you must have been so hurt and it must have been so hard for you. And she said, I know, honey, but he was sick and only God could heal him. And I just needed to love him. And so I always think of that example. I'm sorry I'm getting so emotional, but like that.
I understand how much she must love her grandmother, and I don't mean to take away from any of that, okay? But the idea that we are not supposed to have boundaries is very, very dangerous and destructive. And if you talk to anybody who works with alcoholics, what you will hear is that you do need boundaries. Very, very firm ones.
Yeah. People aren't going to change until they hit rock bottom.
Yeah.
And if you keep digging the well deeper, they're just going to get more and more into trouble. Like at some point they need to face the consequences of their action. And you protecting yourself and staying safe is one of the guardrails that should signal them they need to get help.
Yeah.
And not having those guardrails and just opening yourself up to being abused, it doesn't help you, and it also doesn't help them.
No, it is really scary. That is the message here, is that no matter what is going on in our marriage, we should not have boundaries on our humility. Again, the Bible talks about justice. The Bible cares that we are protected. Jesus goes out of his way to protect people and to rescue them. And so the idea that God wants you in an abusive marriage or in a marriage to an addict, as well as thinking about what impact is that having on the children in that marriage, when you stay with an addict, or you don't confront the addict, or you don't draw boundaries. Just really, really scary stuff. Yeah. And we see this a lot.
And you're not helping anybody by being walked over.
Yeah.
It doesn't help anybody.
No, it doesn't. Okay, here's another one on Marriage is Hard. Every Heart Restored, which is written, it's the one about the human toilet for semen that we already talked about, but it is written for wives whose husbands are porn addicts or sex addicts in some way. Yeah. And how do you get over that? How do you
get past that?
How do you heal when your husband's been doing this? And at the end, they talk about how to rebuild trust and what to do when he's, trying to get better. And they say this, okay? Why shouldn't you expect to make sacrifices even in the marriage bed? On the battlefield of broken sexual trust, your husband must become trustworthy and you must eventually choose to trust again. And that'll mean sexual sacrifice. It's self-defeating to worry about which should come first. And it's that last bit I really want to stress. Okay. Again. So what they're saying is, marriage is hard. It's going to take sacrifice. And so if he's been using porn, if he's been unfaithful to you, you shouldn't wait for him to rebuild trust for you to give him sex again. Yeah. It doesn't matter which comes first. You need to take, you need to take, and that is so wrong. Yeah.
So again, it's completely boundaryless, right? It's saying he needs to rebuild trust and you need to trust him again. And either two of those things can happen in whatever order, which is ridiculous. Yeah. That is, if a person breaks trust, it is up to that person to rebuild that trust before they can expect to be trusted again. Yeah. Like that's what repentance is. It's like making right what you did wrong. And so to then put the onus on the woman to start giving him sex again. Yeah. Like it's a completely boundaryless life. And then to couch it in the ideas of, it's difficult, but you need to do it. That's horrendous.
Yeah,
It's
it really
horrendous.
is. It really is. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the fifth one.
Right.
So you've told people, hey, your expectations are the problem. You just need to go to God. You obviously don't have enough faith. Hey, marriage is hard. You need
What
to
did you
stick it out
expect?
no matter what. And
And
when
you're have no boundaries, and then you
Yeah.
won't feel like you're so hard done by.
and a lot of people who are in destructive marriages have been, up to this point, they've been trying to do it on their own. They've been reading the books. They've been trying to do it on their own, but eventually they break and they go to their pastor and they say, I think I need to leave him. I
can't take
I
this
can't
anymore."
take this anymore. And that's when the final one gets taken out, which is you're not allowed to divorce no matter what.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's also not just it's also in the water from the
It is.
very beginning.
Yes, it is.
Right. But yeah, but then when it all finally push comes to shove, and you're at that point where you just can't take it anymore, this is the last message that you hear.
Right.
You just can't get out.
Right. You just can't get out and you need to stick with it no matter what. And we have so very many examples of this. When we asked women in our survey for the Great Sex Rescue, if there were any reasons for a divorce other than adultery, and overwhelmingly, a majority said, no, you can't divorce.
Yeah.
For anything other than adultery. So you can't divorce for abuse, you can't divorce for abandonment, for addictions, etc. This is a big problem. And we hear stories like John MacArthur's church, where he sent women back to their abusive husbands, even husbands who were sexually abusing the kids.
Yeah.
Martha Peace says that you have
And
to stay...
excommunicated the wife when she refused to do so.
Right. Martha Peace has stuff on how you need to stay with a man who is sexually abusive. Like it's really, really bad.
Mm-hmm.
It is really, really bad. How many churches and denominations say that you cannot divorce for abuse?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We're not going to belabor this too much, but just as an example, here again is Lisa Chan and Lisa and Francis Chan talking about divorce.
The world, and we go to supposedly Christian counselors who are saying, you know what, yeah, it's not okay for you to feel that way, so now you can divorce or leave or separate or all of this. And it's like, brothers, this ought not to be, is what comes to my mind. Or I think about in the Old Testament when the prophets would suddenly, or an old king would find the word of God and they would read it and they would be like, oh crud, we've been completely missing this. And they tear their clothes and they put dust on their head and they tear the hair out of their beards. Like they're mortified. And that's kind of how I feel like we need to start feeling about this. Like we should be mortified that this many people in the church are just making a wreck of the picture of the gospel that God wanted our marriages to display.
Yeah, that's pretty heavy.
Yeah, notice how she doesn't just say you can't divorce, she says you can't even separate.
Right.
That even separation
Right.
is wrong.
And the whole idea of divorce is so reprehensible to her that she says, oh, brothers, this ought not to be so. Mm-hmm. Right? That's a quote from the Bible.
Okay.
Right? That's a quote from James. Mm-hmm. So it's the part in James where he's talking about the power of the tongue, where the same tongue brings forth praise to God and curses our fellow human, right? So that, brothers, this should not be so. The same mouth doing these two things.
Right.
Like, so an abuser who says, I'm so sorry, I love you, honey, I'll never do it again, and then the next night is hurling the same insults at you, that's who that verse is targeting. That verse is not targeting the person who's getting out of that relationship and trying to keep themselves safe. But she's using that verse to target the person seeking safety.
Yeah.
Like, what if it's flipping it on its head?
Yeah. It's just like that verse in Malachi where, people translate it as God hates divorce. And it actually isn't that. But when you look at what it's talking about is God hates men who are unfaithful toward their wives and discard them and leave them without justice.
Because in that time, men were allowed to divorce their wives. And then in those times, the woman would have no recourse and she'd be in poverty.
Right. And so what God is actually
That's not
hating
just.
is abusive, unjust behavior. He's not hating the woman who leaves her husband in order to protect herself and her children.
Yeah.
And so this is really misusing scripture here to make people feel like divorce is the worst sin. No, the things that lead to divorce are what really hurts God's heart. Yeah. The abuse, the infidelity, the addictions. Yeah. That's what hurts God's heart. Yeah.
So when a woman divorces an abusive man, she is not ending the marriage.
Right.
He broke the covenant with his abusive behavior. She's just calling time of death. Yeah. Right? I think that's Sarah says that.
Yeah.
Right?
Probably, yeah. Sarah McDougall, our friend Sarah McDougall. Yeah.
You're not ending the marriage, you're just calling time of death because it's dead.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So you tell people, hey, you're not allowed to leave. And this leaves people really despondent. Like this leaves people quite desperate. And so there's a next point. I don't really call it one of the 5 points. We'll call it like 5B or something. It's like a sub point of 5, which is
it's to help people, to help this bitter pill go down a little easier.
Which is, hey, your reward is in heaven.
Yeah.
Your reward is in heaven. And so let's play a clip. This follows the story of Lisa Chan talking about her grandfather. And so this is Lisa and Francis talking about that story.
Like that shows the world something very different. And there would even be Christians who would say, your grandma did the wrong thing. She should have left. She should have smashed the cake in his face. But I think my grandma, her heart was so soft and so sweet, and she didn't allow that bitterness to take root. So humility did something really beautiful in her.
Well, yeah, and with this book of Everything in Light of Eternity, I think about Grandma Clara right now. Does she have any regrets? You know, if she had gone with what the world says, you know, she wouldn't have this reward that she has right now in heaven, and the joy and God just lavished upon his daughter. Like, gosh, I saw what you did that no one else knew about, and I saw how difficult it was. And so come here, and here's your blessing, and here's your reward. But we don't.
So again, it's like, hey, if you had left that addicted spouse who was hurting you and the kids, you wouldn't get your reward in heaven. Think about what you'll miss out on if you leave your abusive spouse or your addicted spouse. And he's not the only one who says this. I want to read you this from
the
Love and
Eggridge
Respect.
one?
This one I think is so funny. When Joanna read Love and Respect for the first time, she called me when she got to this passage. She
Have
says,
you read
this? So let me read this. And this again, from Love and Respect, Emerson Eggridge. One way I like to picture this is that there is a cha-ching effect in heaven when believers do things the world might call stupid, which is exactly what, Lisa and Francis Chan were talking about too. It's as though a billion angels are holding a gigantic handle. Each time you do something loving or respectful toward your spouse, the angels pull down on that handle. A secret treasure dumps into a colossal golden bowl, and cha-ching, the lead angel exclaims, he did it again. He put on love toward that disdainful woman. She did it again. She put on respect toward that pathetic man. Okay, everyone, hit it again. Cha-ching.
Yeah. Comparing heaven to a casino aside, this is just atrocious, right?
It is.
The worse you're treated in this life, the better it's going to be for you in heaven.
Yeah. And it doesn't work that way. And notice too what he said. When believers do things the world might call stupid. And Lisa Chan also said, look, Christian counselors are telling you to divorce. Yeah. And they're just telling people to ignore when you get advice, which could actually be healthy.
Yeah, because it doesn't fit their preconceived theological ideas of how marriage is supposed to work. Mm-hmm. So instead of having people in great distress, having lived out marriage the way you told them to, like instead of saying, "Ooh, maybe I'm teaching wrong," no, it's like, no, you can't get a divorce. Yeah, like yeah, but if ultimately our theology is more important than the evidence of our own eyes, it's going to lead us to doing unhealthy things, and nothing's going to persuade us that we're wrong. Yeah. No, it's just really bad. Okay, here's another quote. This is from Gary Thomas, again, in his book, A Lifelong Love. And he says this, in the case of marriage, the magnificent obsession takes us from filling our marriages with renewed passion by worshiping a perfect God who considers our spouses his children, to being filled with hope because loving our spouses well can earn us heavenly rewards. Most people want to know how to make their marriages more pleasant or more fulfilling right now, but Scripture urges us to set our sights much higher because how we live out our marriages here can affect us for all eternity. Mm-hmm. And so again, it's like no matter how bad things are, look at eternity. You're going to get these heavenly rewards. And so many of these things have like a grain of truth in them.
A lot of them do, right?
You know, like because like long-term gain, like you know, me getting my needs met instantly right now might make me feel good right now, but it's not good for our relationship long-term. Right. Like we need to have a balance here. Yeah. Right. So being able to take a moment, dude. Like, calm down. Like, long-term gain, short-term pain for long-term gain. Having those kind of talks is fine. But to sort of say, like, your reward in heaven, then there's definitely a sense there that you're not going to make progress on this in this life. It's just going to be suffering. And that's something that God has planned for good on the other side for you.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's healthy.
No, it really isn't. And that's the problem, is so much of this stuff, like all of these different points, if they were saying these things while also telling people how to draw boundaries, how to bring up difficult conversations, how to make sure the wife feels like she can confront her husband if he's in sin, then there wouldn't be a problem, because we are to treat each other as Christ did, right? Like, we are to lay down our lives for each other. But when you're only telling that side of it, and you aren't equipping people with actual tools to make their marriage healthy, then you're going to end up with unhealthy marriages.
Yeah. So if you've got two people who are emotionally immature and don't know how to react to each other in a healthy way, all of these teachings just cement them in that relationship. The best you can get is she'll stop complaining to him.
Yeah.
Like, that's the best we're hoping for.
Yeah. And
then maybe that'll be fine. And then and maybe she'll just suck it up for 50 years.
Yeah.
Like, is that the marriage you want?
Yeah.
Do we think that that's the best the Christian world has to offer?
Yeah.
Like, come on, it doesn't make any sense.
And so that's why we wrote The Marriage You Want, because we wanted to write a book that was truly different for the evangelical Christian world.
Yeah.
Because all of these books are based on that same faulty premise that
All the other
men are
books.
in authority. Men are in authority over women, and then all of these things follow. Where instead of giving actual tools, because we can't give actual tools for people to fix things, if men are in authority over women, then women actually can't use any of the healthy tools.
Or we have to give different tools to men that we give to women.
Right. And so we can't actually build a proper team.
Yeah. Because the Bible has a lot to say to make a healthy marriage.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really good things in the Bible to make us better people if we just take those words to heart. But if we think these verses are for women and these verses are for men, and don't you dare do this if you're a woman, and don't you dare do that if you're a man, and all this kind of nonsense, and we try and parse things out, and then we have all these theological overlays that we will make sure that we interpret the Bible verses only in a certain way that lines up with what we already believe.
Yeah.
It just compounds and it becomes this horrible, difficult situation. As opposed to just saying, hey, let's just read what the Bible says about treating each other well, husband and wife, and put those in practice.
Yeah.
We'd be so much better off.
Yeah. And we wouldn't have to gaslight ourselves, and we wouldn't have to tell ourselves, well, I guess I just have to live with this for the rest of my life. Which is so sad. It's such a sad view. And they're making it sound hopeful. Isn't it wonderful how you have this opportunity to display Christ to each other? But what they're really saying is, you just got to suck it up and live this miserable life.
Yeah, it doesn't sound hopeful to me. It sounds like you'll be rewarded in heaven, doesn't it? Yeah,
I mean,
maybe I'm worldly, I guess, then. But I really think we could do better.
But Jesus did better. With his disciples, when they weren't treating each other well, he helped them treat each other better. People grew in love, and they understood how to draw boundaries, and they understood how to call each other out. And when you look in the New Testament, people are calling each other out.
Absolutely. And helping each other grow.
People are holding each other accountable. They're talking directly to one another. They're saying important things, and they're spurring each other on to love and good deeds. They're not just saying, well, I'm just going to accept however you treat me.
Right.
That's just not the New Testament message. Yeah. It's not.
Yeah. And I said this before too, that the command of Jesus is to love, one another as I have loved you. And he also says to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I mean, those to me are pretty key teachings in Christian thought. And if we put just those two practices in place in our marriage, I think our marriages would be so healthy and so vibrant and so loving and so great. What keeps us from doing that? What keeps us from doing that is bad teachings that teach essentially a man has to love his wife different than a wife loves her husband.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Get rid of that and just follow Jesus' simple teaching. And they say, oh, well, but God's baked hierarchy and authority into the world. What did Jesus say? You've heard it said, among the Gentiles, they lord it over one another, but not so among you. Yeah. Jesus doesn't want hierarchy. Jesus doesn't want, it's not about who's right in the pecking order. When his disciples fought about who's going to have the right hand and the left hand, he didn't say, okay, here's who it is. He said, you're on the wrong page. If you're talking about who's in charge, you're not even listening to the story.
You've missed the point entirely.
Right? So when we start talking about how men and women are supposed to love each other in these gender specific ways, and we miss the point of loving each other as I have loved you, and treating each other as you would want to be treated, it's the same thing.
Yep, we've missed it.
We think the Bible has a lot to teach about marriage. We just need to get rid of all this other nonsense that's man-made teaching and get back to what the Bible truly says.
That's right. Now, in the marriage you want, all of this stuff that we've talked about today was originally in our conclusion. It was a lengthy conclusion, and it was really on the nose, calling the evangelical church to do better. Yeah. And we eventually decided it was a little too on the nose. And so we took it out and we replaced it with still a very good conclusion. But you can get that original conclusion with all of this stuff as our pre-order bonus for pre-ordering The Marriage You Want, which is available on March 11th. And so if you send us your pre-order receipt from wherever you bought it, for you Aussies, by the way, because I keep getting questions about this from Australia, don't go to Amazon. It's still really expensive. But you can go to Coorong and pre-order it on Coorong, and it's a decent price there. But when you send in your pre-order receipt, we will send you the original chapter, which had all of these 5 things and how they all relate to one another, and more. So yeah, the link is in the podcast notes to get that pre-order bonus. But we can do better than this. And so when people wonder why all marriage books are toxic, it's because they have the same premise, and then from that, all the other stuff has to flow. And here's just a fun experiment for all of you. Take any marriage book off your shelf, any evangelical marriage book, and see if you can find all those 5 things, because chances are you will. And the ones that you won't, like boundaries in marriage, it's because they don't start with the same premise. Boundaries in Marriage does not start with the premise that men are in authority over women. And that's why Boundaries in Marriage is a healthy book. I might have quibble with a few things, but it's a relatively healthy book. Overall. Same with the book How We Love, which, again, I have quibble with a few things. They like Steve Arterburn, but it's not based on this premise that husbands are in authority over wives. It's based on attachment theory. And so it ends up being a really practical, healthy book.
Any book that starts with the premise that human beings are human beings, as opposed to men are one species and women are another species, is going to be healthier, because the data just shows that men and women are more alike than they are different. So that's just reality.
So let's just go with what's healthy, what's biblical, and what's evidence-based. And that's what The Marriage You Want is. And I'm so excited that's coming to you soon. And in the next 2 podcasts, we're going to actually start talking about what's actually in the book. And what we say leads to The Marriage You Want. But we wanted to do this unveiling before we started that on why it is that so many books get things wrong and just end up gaslighting us. And we can do better than this. So train yourself to recognize those 5 things. See if you see them in your pastor's sermons, in megachurch pastor's sermons that you listen to online, at marriage conferences. See if you see them. And that'll be a red flag that there's a premise that's wrong and we can do better. So I'm excited to take a look and do a deeper dive into The Marriage You Want in the next coming week. Send us your pre-order receipts. The launch team is going to start next week. You'll get an invite to it if you send us your pre-order receipts too. That's going to be an awesome Facebook group and more. So we look forward to seeing you there. And we look forward to being back here next week again on the Bare Marriage Podcast.
Bye.
Bye-bye.